All right. Hey, Kathy, how you doing?
Hey, Allie, I'm good.
Thank you
You?
so much. I'm wonderful. I'm always wonderful.
Good.
But thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're busy. You're doing a lot of stuff.
Oh,
So thank you.
I appreciate being able to do this, so thank you too.
Yeah, we're going to have a great convo today. So I'm going to start off with just a little bit of an intro, and then I'll let you talk about yourself in your own words. But you're amazing. You're a mental health counselor in Colorado. You've been a trauma therapist for quite a while. And for
Mhm.
about 10 years, right? 10 years, you have been helping clients, victims, advocates, professionals in the
Mhm.
fraud fighting area.
I
So,
have.
and not a lot of you. There's not a lot of you out there.
No, that's
So,
just me. Yeah. So,
yeah.
yeah, it did. It was somewhere a little over 10 years ago. I just happened to get a couple of clients, and this is what had happened to them. And it was quickly very clear that the counseling once a week really wasn't enough. So we had all looked for resources for how do you deal with this emotional storm that you're in at that time. And there was nothing. And so along with working with them, I created a web page for that. And then it wasn't but a year or so later, that web page became wildly popular. Like the traffic was, I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
And then I started getting calls in the middle of the night, emails at all times. And this all just kind of grew into here's this book. And now here's this online training and videos. And now here we are.
Yeah. You have a book. What's the title of the book? I know the title, but tell the title of the book.
Right? It's the emotional impact of being scammed and how to recover.
Yeah, and I can say a lot of our participants almost weekly
Mm.
they'll say, "Have you heard of Kathy Wilson? She wrote a
Oh,
book." I'm like, "Yes, I know. Yes, she did. Read that book. It's so good."
mm.
They find great comfort in it. So,
Well, I'm glad.
if you out there haven't read it, please read it. It is very helpful. So, Kathy Wilson has lots of resources out there. What's your website again, Kathy?
The website to go to for resources is scamsurvivorhealing.com.
Okay. And that's where all of your videos, your trainings
You can get to
are
it all there.
located there.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Kathy, we're going to get started. I'm going to give you your first question.
Okay.
All right, here you go. What are the most significant mental health challenges faced by victims of romance fraud?
Okay. So that's actually a super easy question because the number one first emotional thing that usually happens for people, besides the horror of what just happened, realizing what's happened, is shame.
Mhm.
This shame is such a powerful emotion and it overcomes people, it overwhelms them. And that proves to be the toughest thing to deal with from that point forward. And sometimes comes up suddenly out of nowhere when they were thinking about something else. It's a rough thing to heal from.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I've heard you say this a lot of times. We say this,
Mhm.
right? The public doesn't necessarily help with this, right?
Yeah.
We hear things like, "Oh, how can you be so dumb?" Right? How can you be so stupid?
Right.
Um, have you heard that? I know you've heard that. I know you've
I
heard
have
people say
heard
that.
that. And
Mhm.
reading comments on articles and videos about this is torturous.
Yeah.
It's terrible the things that people will say. And I mean, that's what they're thinking. We have a system that supports victim blaming,
Mhm.
unfortunately. And so that blame piece comes up with a lot of people. And that was the next thing I was going to mention, that for victims, there's this shame and all the emotions, guilt, heartbreak, you name it. Guilt if there's another partner is what it is, the real life partner.
Yeah.
Um, and but that next thing is if they decide to tell anyone, they often don't get a great reaction, way
Yeah.
too often, and that makes it that much harder. So they're kind of re-traumatized at that point. And then a third thing is there's such a difficulty in finding a therapist like me, someone to go to for weekly therapy and talk through this and heal from it. And I am on a mission. I want to bridge that gap very much so.
Yeah, I think several good points you brought up. Think about the potential significant other, right? That is also involved in
Mhm,
this crime. So you have the
mhm.
victim of the crime and then the victim's spouse or partner. That is a challenging, tricky situation.
Yeah,
And there's also not a lot of help for the spouse or significant other or partner, right?
there's
Because
not.
man, is that traumatic for them as well, right?
It
This is a crime that affects the whole family, the
it
whole
does.
network.
It
Yeah.
does. Absolutely. And that gets forgotten too. So the impact on victims themselves, the primary victim, maybe we could say it that way,
Mhm.
it's tremendous and invisible to most of the world. Most people really don't understand what has happened. And then, yes, there's these, I hesitate to say secondary victims because no trauma feels secondary in
Yeah.
any
Yeah.
way, but they're on the periphery. It's happening to them too, but they aren't, the center, the main person that was the victim.
Yeah.
Very much invisible impacts. And even talking with family and friends, sometimes it's hard to find someone that can go there with you and talk
Yeah.
about that. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I know like at some point every experience is different, right? But I have noticed uh at a stage when one of our participants in our support group has accepted kind of that,
Mhm.
okay, I am talking to a scammer, they will say something to the effect of, I am so stupid. How did
Mhm.
this happen? How am I here? Right.
Right.
And that's really too when the shame will really hit of, oh my gosh, what is
Yes.
happening? I can't believe I
Mhm.
did this. And now the trust, right? The trust
Mhm.
thing of I can't trust anyone else and I can't even trust myself.
That's
That's
so
like
right. Right.
linked, right?
And getting that ability to trust yourself back, that's a rough part of the healing as well. And
Hmm.
understanding it helps with the shame and getting your trust back. The more you understand the tactics that they use and the depth of skill that these criminals have in doing this. I can't even emphasize that enough. I'm
Yeah.
still trying to find words that really make it hit home for people that the skills are just tremendous. So,
Yeah, and the
yeah.
time that they're putting into it, right? I
Oh,
think
yes.
that also is what people don't realize. They're studying you. If your
Mhm,
information is public,
mhm,
whether by choice or just maybe you're a public figure, right? If your information is public, they are collecting it and they
mhm.
are figuring out how to use it against you, how to find a vulnerability, how to find a way in constantly.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
they're ready by the time they reach out to you and get a conversation going, they're ready with details about you that they can exploit.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Mm,
100%, right?
yeah.
So the conversation we're having kind of loops into the question I'm going to ask you next.
Mm,
So why do you think romance fraud victims, excuse me, often struggle to find appropriate mental health support?
mm. Okay. So I'm going to take that almost like in stages. So immediately after this happens, perhaps they call a crisis line. Unless they find a crisis line that's open now, that is specifically for fraud victims, they're likely to get someone who has no idea the true impact of what has happened to them. So those crisis line workers have no training, as far
Hmm.
as I'm aware, and might have some difficulty in really helping that person. So that's one piece that I've heard from victims when they made those kind of calls. Second is in this middle area, they may be looking for somewhat a little bit more an advocate who understands this, a
Hmm.
support group that they can go to. And of course, the support groups at your organization are fabulous, the best I know of.
Thank
And
you.
you're welcome. We need them all over the country, in person, virtual, for different subgroups. We need a lot more of that. And it's very difficult for victims to find that.
Yeah.
So then they reach this point where they know they need long-term support, or they feel strongly that would be a helpful way for them to find healing from this. In my field, it's extremely difficult for them to find a mental health person that they can trust won't come at them with victim blaming, which is, even though this is my profession and we're a bunch of helpers and have a lot of compassion and empathy, sometimes things do come out of a therapist's mouth that are not super helpful too. And so that has happened. Even finding someone to give them a call back. Sometimes a therapist doesn't call back if their skills don't meet what the person needs. And so there's a couple things there that I could talk about that have to do with finding a mental health person. And then I'll say that is a big problem that I'm working really hard to solve right now.
Yeah, I think, and I'll interject, I know you probably have more to say, but I think that's got to be so frustrating for the victim, right? You're calling, you're just hoping to get a response, hoping to get some sort of information, and then kind of crickets, right?
Crickets, right.
Yeah.
And if you do get someone, so maybe you get started, but you quickly realize they're really not getting what happened to me, right?
Yeah.
And there's, finding a good fit of a counselor, it's already difficult. But when you have an issue like this that is so sensitive, they're so traumatized, it makes that process that much more difficult. So
yeah. And you can see too why a counselor or therapist may be like, ooh, I don't know, right? Like, ooh, this seems technical, or I'm just not familiar with this.
right.
So you can see why they'd potentially be hesitant to take a case on like this.
And
So
I've actually gained a little insight into that recently. About a week ago, I put a survey out to my peers, a very informal survey. So this is not a good statistical analysis whatsoever.
It's not a white paper. It's not a white paper. Yeah.
Right. But as far as qualitative information, it really helped me to understand some misunderstandings that are out there in my own field. And I can work to address those through a couple of different avenues. And really showed me some misconceptions that therapists are holding. Number one being something you just said was they're not really realizing the depth of how a romance scam affects a person. Yeah. This is not all therapists. And like, I'm sounding defensive right now. I don't want to sound defensive.
No, you're good. You're good.
And at the same time, like, we need to recognize that not all of us have the same skills. And so finding someone who really understands that depth gets to be really important for a lot of victims.
Yeah, absolutely. So what needs to change, right? How do we make mental health care more accessible for romance fraud victims?
So there's that awareness piece, right? Absolutely. Me, for instance, helping educate my peers on why it's so important, first of all, and then them getting educated on this. They can find my training and take that. There's many ways for therapists to get some education on this, having a conversation with me, reading my website, reading your website, many ways to start to educate themselves. And then the other piece is more of a technical piece where the difficulty finding someone. So say I'm a therapist that's brand new to this area of work. I need to put it on my website that I understand this and I can help them. I personally feel like the big therapist directories need to put a specific category for this, because it's big enough to warrant it. Most of them have a PTSD and trauma category, and most have a grief category, and most have a betrayal category. They need one for this too. It's that important.
And yet it's all still related, right? You're saying these were like trauma, grief, betrayal, right? All of that is in there, right? I think people don't realize, like, absolutely, you need extra training, but it's not years and years and years of extra training, right?
Right.
I think you have great resources, like you've mentioned.
Mhm.
Um, take some of Kathy Wilson's training, and you're going to start to see,
Yeah.
oh, it's trauma, right?
Right.
I
Right.
know trauma, right? I just have to
Mhm.
understand and be
Mhm.
aware of this crime and the
Absolutely.
similarities, right?
Absolutely, right? And
Mhm.
and my efforts to try and bridge a gap, solve this problem, those kind of things I just mentioned would be great, as well as insurance companies putting a category for this on their doctor and therapist lists that they have on their sites. I have started the process of creating a certification for people who take some training on this and can show that they have this knowledge level. And in addition to that, I'm looking into creating a directory myself through a nonprofit that I created for that purpose.
Yeah, I want that directory. So get on that.
I'm
Start
I'm
getting on that,
trying.
Kathy.
I'm trying. Yeah.
All right. I think you really answered this question already, but I'm going to post it just in case
Okay.
you have anything else to say. But really, how can therapists, how can counselors be
Mm,
better educated about the psychological effects of
right.
frauds like
Right.
these?
So it absolutely is a matter of education. And I would, and so getting some knowledge in that area would be extremely helpful just to tie that into how is this trauma and what other factors are going along with that trauma. I would also suggest to therapists to really pay attention to what scams are out there. Pay attention to the alerts that you see, the news stories of victims and how they're talking about the effects that they experienced. And those things, one, there's a protective aspect of why I say that. Know what scams are out there so that you have a shot at recognizing it if a scammer comes at you. And also all of those news stories about victims, they all help us to see what that experience is like.
Yeah. And I think too, the emotional manipulation
Mhm,
that a cyber criminal uses should
mhm.
be very familiar to a counselor, therapist, trained social worker, right? Of,
Mhm.
the gaslighting,
Oh, yeah.
the emotional blackmail,
Right.
all those emotional manipulation tactics that
Mhm.
that they use to get into somebody's head, right?
Right.
It's
But
the social engineering part is what makes them successful. The
oh, it
technology
is.
helps, but it's the
It
emotional
is.
manipulation.
Right, right. And I personally feel like whether you as a counselor ever were to have a fraud victim as your client, understanding the tactics that they use really is helpful to understand how people navigate difficult relationships, an abusive partner, for
Hmm.
instance.
Hmm.
Um, you name it, families that have someone who has been in a cult and now they're back home. How do you support them? All all of those things are important things for a mental health person to know. And it is very much a factor that about those things, but you don't think about it in terms of a scam, a
Yeah,
fraud.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So, and again, we've kind of touched on this a little more, but I want to dive a little deeper into it. We've discussed the barriers, right? Why a counselor may or may
Mhm,
not want to take on a romance fraud victim.
mhm.
Part of that being like, "Ooh, I just don't know about this, right? I don't have a background in this."
Right.
Um, are there any other barriers that you see that are preventing therapist counselors from taking on romance fraud victims as clients?
Okay. So some of that is beliefs that they may be carrying now, which again, that quick little unofficial survey that I did showed me there were several answers on that survey where people are saying, I didn't realize this was that prevalent.
Mm,
I've never
okay.
had a client mention this, and it never really occurred to me that, maybe some of my existing clients have had this happen, but were too ashamed to bring it up. Right.
Exactly.
So they had these
Mhm.
realizations through that. So more education like that could help with this barrier where there's just, it's an invisible epidemic, and people
Yeah.
don't, they're not realizing what we have in front of us. And in my field, I get feeling a little desperate because we need to be ready. There's unfortunately going to be more. It's
Right.
a growing number.
It's going to get worse before it gets better. And
Mhm.
yet, when you were talking, I was thinking of a story that we heard from a participant.
Mhm.
Um, I think a lot of times when they're probably talking with counselor or therapist, they're saying, I'm seeing someone. Oh my gosh, it's so great. I love it. Right. Because in the beginning, it's amazing. The
Mhm.
criminals being amazing to you, right? Because they're
Right.
pulling those emotional manipulation strings. And this individual's therapist was encouraging the relationship because
Yeah.
they didn't
They
know,
didn't
they
see the
didn't see
red
the
flags.
signs,
Right.
right? Didn't know what
Right.
questions to ask. For instance,
Mhm.
you never ask, do you know this person? Because the victim's always going to say, of course I know them, right? You
Right.
say, have you met this person
Right.
in person? And
Yes.
that's when you can start to see what is exactly happening. And
Right.
so,
Right. And I'm frantically, like, I'm watching and participating here, but I'm thinking, oh, I need to include this and
write
get
that
this
down.
out to people.
Write that down, Kathy. Write it down. No,
Right.
if this helps you, then write it down. Yeah.
Right.
So I'm a victim, right? I need a
Mhm.
counselor. I know I need a counselor. I recognize it. What
Mhm.
is your advice for me? How do I find a counselor that's either experienced in
Mhm.
fraud or is gonna get me there, right?
Right.
Is a professional enough to help me through this particular problem in my life?
Right. Right. Okay. So the first thing I want everyone to know about therapists is that your most important factor is that this is a person you feel like you're a good fit with. If it doesn't feel comfortable for you, you're not going to be able to talk about the things you need to talk about. So, having said that piece, when you go searching for someone, you, I'm going to say right now, go to one of the national therapist directories and search for someone who works with trauma and or someone who works with grief and or someone who works with betrayal. If one or two of those fit better, if just one of those fits best for you, search for that. But that combination has been very helpful to me in helping a person find someone that's local to them, that takes their insurance. Those factors come later. These three pieces of mental health are the important pieces to
Mm,
address first. If the therapist mentions shame, but not betrayal or guilt, or grief, fine. Shame and trauma, absolutely. Right. So I guess there's four. So those four things to search for are of the primary importance. If you take those four things, shame, trauma, grief, betrayal, pick what works best for you to search for those things. And then once you take care of the insurance, the location, those things work, then talk to at least two, possibly three people. Talk to them enough, talk about what happened, see how they react to you.
mm.
You're going to know after a couple of conversations which person is the best fit for you. You're going to know. So, absolutely would recommend those conversations. And I know it's a hard process. I know it's hard to make that first call to a person. And I know people have the courage to do that too.
It is, and I've told you this before, but when I was looking for my own therapy, I just didn't realize how hard it is to find that good fit, right? Again, they may be an amazing therapist, amazing counselor, but if you don't jive with them, it's just not going to work, right?
It's
So
not.
that's such an important piece that you brought up.
It is.
Um,
It really is. And it's really okay to tell a therapist, I'm not feeling like this is the best fit for me. I think I need to, try again.
yeah, we're
And
not jiving. We're not
we're
jiving.
not. We're not.
Yeah.
And therapists are human. Some may be offended, but none of us should be offended because that's one of the first things we learn in grad school. Good fits, the first and most important piece.
Yeah, so important. I'm glad you
Yeah.
brought that up. Are there any specific certifications out there
There are
for
not right
this?
now.
There are none. I knew the answer.
Yep. Right. There are not, but
Yeah.
I do hope to have that be a part of the nonprofit that I'm putting together, that and a directory, so
Mhm.
that we can make it easy for victims to find someone. They'll have a place they can go. Organizations like yours can go there, refer victims there, and it'll be somewhat centralized to find mental health support.
Yeah, again,
Cool.
you can't get that fast enough for me, Cathy. So get on that, girl. Get
I'm
on
working
that.
it. I'm working it.
Okay, so what can, and I think this is such a great question, what
Mm.
can family members or friends do to support a victim in accessing the right mental health care?
Okay, so knowing all those things, that's helpful because you can help the person walk through that process, maybe make some calls for them to get that process started, for instance, and then educating yourself on all of these aspects we've been talking about. What is this shame about? What are these psychological tactics that scammers use so that when the person you love starts saying, oh, I'm just still feeling so stupid, like, how could I do this? You have some things that you can say. You have some understanding of those tactics so that you can remind them about that. And then I do want to mention there's a particularly difficult problem that families often deal with, and that's if you have a family member who really doesn't want to accept that they are
Mm,
talking to a scammer. It
yeah.
sounds like it to you, but they don't want to let go of that
No.
relationship. And there's multiple factors on why, but that's something that you need help with. You need some help with that. And someone like me, your organization has some resources to refer people to. Um, you don't have a family and friends group right now, is that right?
We do not. We do not. We would love to have one, right?
Right,
But we currently yeah, but we
right,
currently do not. Yeah.
right. So yes, family and friends, reaching out to people like us to seek out what kind of resources are available to help you respond to and interact with this person to give you the best chance at helping them extract themselves, because the influence is so powerful. You just can't imagine. You just can't imagine how hard that is.
Yeah. And truly taking care of yourselves, right? As the friend and the family, because you're
Yes.
going to get frustrated, right? You're going to be like, oh my God, what? Why don't you see this, right? How
Mhm,
can you not see this? And we do see well intentioned family
mhm.
members doing things like taking internet away, taking devices away, trying to
Right,
take complete control of the victim's life, and you understand why, right? They're just like,
right.
oh my gosh, you won't listen, I don't know what else to do. But it actually exacerbates the situation. It creates this Romeo Juliet paradigm. Sometimes you're driving them further into the criminal's arms.
Yeah,
And
it,
I mean,
it it does really drive this Romeo Juliet feeling, doesn't it?
yeah, yeah,
That's so
yeah,
important.
yeah. And so, like, remember to take care of yourself too, because I can't imagine the frustration. I can't
Right,
imagine the frustration.
right. I agree.
All right, this is my fun dance to let you know we're going to do fun questions now.
Oh
Maybe not
boy.
fun questions,
All
but
right.
different questions. So, first
Yeah.
one, what was your best day you've ever had while doing this work?
Best day.
Best day.
So that's hard to answer with one best day. And I say that because anytime a person comes back to me or we end a conversation and they are so grateful
Hmm.
to have someone understand, like, okay, I'm not going to cry right now,
Go
but
ahead. This is a safe space, Kathy. This is a safe
but
space.
the I feel so happy that
Mm.
what I've put together, see, I'm crying anyway. I feel so happy that
Virtual tissue, virtual
thank
tissue.
you, that it was helpful to them. It's the
Yeah.
whole reason I do it.
Yeah.
It's
I love the days I sorry, I'm interrupting you. This is
you're
your
good.
pod,
Go.
your little episode, not mine, but I love the days when they say, "I finally blocked them."
Ah,
Yeah.
yeah, it feels good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
I
awesome.
interrupted your best day. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I was done. I was rambling.
I was, I was done. Okay. Conversely, worst day, worst day
Mhm,
while doing this work. And it can be like a group,
mhm.
just like you did with best day.
Right. And I'd say the worst day, it's a multiple. There's been a couple of times when a person really just wouldn't accept all the efforts we made, myself and the working with the family. They just wouldn't and continued on and eventually got hurt even
Yeah.
more than they had already been. That's hard to see that because I really deeply understand how powerful that influence is. Like I said a few minutes ago, I really understand that. And it just makes the pain of the betrayal even worse
Yeah.
when it is finally clear that it is a fraud.
Yeah.
So
It's heartbreaking because
it
you
is.
go through it with them.
You
You go
do.
through it with
You
Yeah.
do.
What is something you've gotten really good at because you do this work?
Patience with people
Yeah.
who who really don't understand the depth of the psychological, and I'm going to say psychological and technological weapons that are being used. So
Absolutely.
the people that say that'd never happen to me.
Mhm. Mhm.
I'm sorry, if you're human, there is a scam for you. There is
Yeah.
a moment when you're vulnerable, and that's it. That's it. So I've gotten a lot more patience with having those conversations with people.
Yeah.
Um, still hard, but I'm better at navigating those with without being a jerk.
Yeah. Without being a jerk. That's a great way to put it. Everyone has their own scam kryptonite, right?
Yes,
And I
yes.
think we've seen, yes, there are certainly commonalities or themes, right? Like loneliness, that is absolutely a theme. Hey,
Right.
I just wanted to start dating again. That's a
Mhm.
theme. Or hey,
Right.
we were friends, right?
Mhm.
But it
Right.
became something else, right? There's
Right.
all these themes and different ways that they
Right.
can manipulate. So I 100% agree.
Absolutely. And, for something other than a romance scam, just hitting you at a moment when you didn't sleep at all last night and
Yes.
you're not at your best. You had a terrible day at work. You just had a big loss. Someone really important to you has passed. Those moments are vulnerable moments, and we all have them.
Yeah, we all know pain, right?
Yeah,
And they love taking advantage of our pain or our happiness, right?
that too.
Or just something that makes us unique, right?
Mhm.
I am in a hiking club and they will get into your hiking club
Right.
and
Yep.
weasel in.
They
All right,
will.
Kathy, who is going to save us? Is it the government? Is it nonprofits? Is it tech companies? Is it an individual? Who's going to save us?
Yeah, it has to be all of those.
All of
It
us.
really has to be.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
right now, there's not enough of us, right? There's not enough victims who have been through it who are speaking out, but that's amazing that they are doing that.
Mhm.
Um, there's not enough funding. Hot topic right now,
Yeah.
but
Hot topic.
right. But and then tech companies, they've got some skin in the game here.
Absolutely.
There's technical things that can be done to to detect this. If they have algorithms that can show me ads for something I searched for 3 days ago, they can profile a scammer profile.
Yeah. Everybody can be
Mhm.
doing more. And we need
Yes.
to, because just like you said earlier,
Mhm.
it's going to get worse.
It is.
It is going to get worse. And we
Mhm.
need to set up a system where
Mhm.
not only do we not shame and punish victims, but we have a pathway for them to go to
Yeah.
recover and prevent them from getting re-victimized, because now their information is all out there for other scammers to pull from, and
Right.
they are getting bombarded with new scam attempts.
Right.
So we need to have that pathway for them.
We
100%.
do. We do.
um, Last two questions for you, Kathy. First one, if you had a magic wand and you could fix one thing about the romance fraud problem set, and it can't be that you could get people their money back or pull their information back, what would you do? What would be at the top of your list? What would you change with that magic wand?
I'd erase victim blaming from our collective consciousness.
Yeah. Period.
Period.
Yep.
Yep.
Period. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's unnecessary.
Mhm.
Right.
It is.
And we punish them. Again, we punish them
Right. But
for the
it
crime.
perpetuates it all. It perpetuates the systemic problems, the lack of accountability on the technology companies, our government. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Last one, Cathy. This is the most important one.
Okay.
What's one thing you want all romance fraud victims to know?
I'm going to say this isn't your fault. That's the most important thing. The depth of skill in this combined technical weapons and psychological weapons is beyond most people's belief. It is a tremendous influence. And like we were saying earlier, there's a scam for every person because we all have needs, things we want. We all have moments when we're not at our best. And you've had people steal from you that are extremely skilled at weapons that is, as people in this society, we're not prepared to be disarmed from. Is that the right way to say that?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. The crime is always the criminal's fault.
Right.
It's always the
Right.
criminal's fault.
Yeah. No, I said it backwards. It's
Say it again.
we don't have we
Say
don't
it again.
right. As regular people, like we're not prepared to be armed against those things. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Cathy Wilson, you've been doing this for 10 years. You've been helping people for 10 years. You're going to continue to help fraud victims.
I am.
I hope for longer than 10 more years, but however long we can have you.
Yeah.
You're a wonderful partner. We love everything you do. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today about the mental health barriers, about what we can do with mental health and how we can better help fraud victims. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you too. All of that right back to you. Thank you. Yeah.
You're the best. All right. Thank you, Cathy.